To simulate the shattering windows on this building, I generally prefer to use an emitted RBD debris pass. I generally don't like using constraints and standard impact collisions to simulate all of these windows because it's generally not very controllable in terms of the glass density, and it's a little bit harder to work with in general. Now I've started by merging in all of the glass from our week 2 prep building, and we need an active frame on each of these glass panes in order to know when we're going to emit those shattered shards, so we can base that active frame on our sim points. So let's merge in those final sim points from week 5 post sim tweaks and then out final sim points. And if we just copy over the active frame value from these points, then each of the different corners of our glass panes might get different active frame values, and we just want one value for each of those individual panes of glass. So I'm going to unpack our glass. Right now it's all just one packed alembic. So let's unpack that and select the path attribute to be transferred down to the geometry. And then I'll convert this from poly soups to regular polygons, and then we'll use an assemble SOP to create a packed piece for each of these individual window panes. Now on this assemble SOP, turn on create packed geometry, and we can select the path attribute under this transfer attributes parameter, and this will give us a different packed piece for each one of those individual window panes based on their connectivity. So now we can use an attribute transfer to get that active frame onto each of those glass panes. So we'll connect the glass to the first input and our sim points to the second. We'll turn off the primitive attributes, and under points, select active frame, and under conditions, we'll turn off the distance threshold because we just want this to find the nearest value regardless of how far away that is. So now if we check the spreadsheet for that attribute transfer, you can see we're getting these active frame values on all of our glass panes, but all of our values range from 987 to 1149. So basically all of these panes of glass are going to be shattered on the entire building. And we really only want the panes that are near the actual destruction area to shatter. So to preserve those extra glass panes that aren't near that destruction area, let's also object merge in the static portion of the building, and we'll bring that in from week 5 post sim tweaks and then out static building. And we'll drop in a point wrangle to set an active frame value on the static portion here. I'm going to set the active frame to a value of 10,000. And then we can merge that with our sim points before the attribute transfer. So now if we display the attribute transfer and check the spreadsheet, you can see that we now have some of those pieces being preserved with an active frame of 10,000, meaning that most of them will never shatter. Now one thing to watch out for is that right now this geometry is time dependent. It's always good to keep as much of your scene non-time dependent as possible, and these windows aren't moving or changing at all, at least at this point in the scene, but our input that's setting those active frame values is animated. So before that attribute transfer, I'm just going to use a time shift to freeze this in place. Let's get rid of that expression on the time shift frame. I'll set that to 985, the first frame of the sim. Drop that after the merge, and now you can see this attribute transfer is no longer time dependent. When you're keeping an eye out for time dependent portions of the scene that will need to recook on every frame, you can either look out for this little clock icon here, or you can middle mouse on the nodes and see if this time dependent flag says yes or no. Now these glass panes are getting an active frame value based on the nearby RBD pieces, but I actually want them to shatter one frame before the nearby pieces start to move. So we can just add a point wrangle. I'll call this active frame offset. And in the vex, we'll just set active frame minus equals 1. Now it's always good to check the active frame values to make sure that they're working properly. So let's drop in a blast stop and connect that to our active frame offset. I'll call this blast shattered. And in the group, we'll set that to check if the active frame is less than or equal to the current frame. And in order for this blast to work, we'll have to set that group type to points because active frame is a point attribute. And if you step through your timeline, you can see those windows disappearing as they shatter. Now I'm going to add a null here for the intact windows. And you can actually render this directly for all of the intact windows in your final shot. You could cache this out if you want to, but I'm not going to bother since this is an extremely quick thing for Houdini to calculate on the fly. Now if we take a closer look at these intact windows, you can see this is perfectly flat planar geometry. And that's not very physically accurate. We don't always need to be completely physically accurate, but it would be a good idea to extrude these a bit for some thickness. So to add that extrusion, we'll go just before the assemble, and we'll add in a poly extrude. And since I don't want to change the shape on the outside of the building, I'm going to use a negative extrude distance. We don't need to extrude it very much. I'll just try a value of minus 0.02, maybe 0.03, and we'll have to turn on this output back. Now, as we've seen in some previous videos, anytime you do a negative extrusion, the normals can be pointing in the wrong direction. So if you turn on the normal display and take a look inside these objects, you can see that sure enough, these normals are pointing inwards. So we can fix those incorrect normals by adding in a reverse. And this will make our normals look wrong, but they'll be pointing in the correct direction. And we can fix them by just adding a new normal node after that reverse. Now, an alternative to emitting all of the debris points when the windows shatter is to scatter all of the windows from the very beginning and then activate them at the correct shatter frame. So I'm going to start by deleting out all of the windows that never shatter. So in this blast, I'll just check if the active frame is greater than 1150. And of course set that to points as well in order for that blast to work. And then unpack the geometry and make sure to transfer that active frame. And then we can scatter some points onto our unpacked windows. So I'll drop in that scatter. We're going to turn off the forest total count. And I'll set this density pretty high. I'll try a value of 80. So that's giving us a little over 25,000 points. And for this, it probably won't make a big difference, but I'm also going to turn off the relax iterations.